This is the Malaka River, which is one of the most famous rivers in Southeast Asia. 600 years ago, an historic meeting took place between Zheng He, the Chinese diplomat, and the Sultan of Malaka. And it was at this very river where it all began. I consider the Malaka River to be a very symbolic location because it is the staging point of the Baba and Nyonya people, or more commonly known as the Peranakan people, although I far prefer the title Baba and Nyonya. It is at the bank of this river where I am standing right now, where the first wave of Baba Nyonya ancestors, not necessarily mine, but the very first wave of Chinese people who came with Zheng He, most of them sailors, stepped onto Malacan soil and integrated and assimilated into the land. And that is why I consider this river to be symbolic in my origin story. Now, at that time, of course, the Emperor of China was trying to create trade links as well as form friendships all throughout the world. And so he sent his envoy, Admiral Zheng He, all the way through Persia, Asia, Africa, the Arab worlds, in order to basically show the might and majesty of Zhongguo, of China, and secondly, in order to build alliances with the rest of the world. Of course, he didn't say, learn Chinese or you're beneath my contempt, barbarian, because diaspora chauvinism didn't exist at that time. But the point is, the Malaka River is the staging point where it all began. Now, some people think that all Baba Nyonya people can trace their ancestry back to the 15th and 16th century Malaka line. Now, those are considered the most orthodox and the most pure, so to speak, of the Peranakans. But pure Peranakan is itself an oxymoron, because the Peranakan, being a Celup or a mixed people, are fundamentally a Creole people that are mixed with Bugis, Javanese, Indian, Arabic, Persian, and of course Chinese ancestry. Now, in recent years, the identity of the base identity of the Baba Nyonya people has gradually shifted towards the Cynic world. But throughout most of history, it was on Nusantara. The base of the Peranakan world was on Nusantara. And in fact, in the olden days, before the late arrivals, most Peranakan families even ate rice with their hands. So the thing is that the first wave, of course, is purported to have come with Admiral Zheng He, sailormen who married into the soil and created a mixed hybrid race of people. But successive waves of Baba Nyonya people were formed as a result of merchants and sailors in the next couple of centuries constantly coming to Nusantara, marrying local wives, and then adding to the population of Baba Nyonya people. In fact, Tan Cheng Lok's ancestor only came about to Malaka in the late 1700s. My ancestor came around in the early 1800s, as did Lim Boon Keng's, but that doesn't make us any less Peranakan. And if you're wondering why my ancestors tend to have a much darker appearance, why, it's because over time, and this is going to sound a little bit eugenicist, but over time, the introduction of Sinke, or late arrival brides, into our family tree started lightening our skin. I'm going to borrow a clip from the Ben Z project for a bit to show you what I mean. It's a really funny clip about a Japanese general who actually doesn't even realize that there's a Peranakan, that the Peranakan in the Malay village is actually not a Malay guy. He mistakes him for just another Malay guy. So I'm not really comfortable with this young generation of Baba Nyonyas who are trying to identify as Peranakan to be distinct from the Sing K category, while at the same time refusing to give credit to the Malay world for the base of their culture. It's really quite duplicitous, if you ask me, to basically downplay the Malay base while trying to overemphasize the Sinic base, while saying at the same time we're not regular Chinese, we're Baba Nyonyas at the same time. It's a very duplicitous thing to do, and frankly it also, to me, it's a form of betrayal in a sense, because fundamentally Malays are our cousins. They are our historic cousins that we live side by side with for hundreds of years. The Portuguese writer Tome Pires once said that he who is Lord of Malaka has his hand on the throat of Venice. Now, what did Tome Pires mean? Well, you have to think about it in terms of economics, really. Now, Malaka is at a very convenient location, located between China and India. Malaka was one of the foremost trading ports in the 15th and 16th centuries. Even during the Portuguese times, after the Portuguese invasion, Malaka had always been, ever since its inception, the New York of Asia in the early modern period. Because our location, our unique location, and our cosmopolitan hybrid nature attracted people from all corners of the globe to Malaka in order to trade. In fact, there's a legend, that goes on that the Sultan of Malaka, in this legend, wanted to marry this beautiful princess called the Princess of Mount Leda. She lived somewhere in Johor, which is about 2 hours away from Malaka, and Johor borders Singapore down in the south. And apparently the princess didn't really like the Sultan very much, so she gave 3 impossible conditions: mosquito hearts, a bowl of mosquito hearts, a bowl of your son's blood, and a golden bridge that leads all the way from Malaka to Johor. Now, I take it that these stories are simply allegorical, they're not real. But, a golden bridge all the way from Malaka to Johor, which is about 2 hours away, of course that's a nonsensical proposition, right? I mean, no architect in the world could come up with such a feat. But it just shows you how rich and how powerful the Sultan of Malaka was at the time. And that's why the Emperor of China was willing, in fact happy, to make him his son-in-law. Because when you make someone your son-in-law, he becomes your property in Chinese culture, basically. So that's why the Emperor of China was happy to give Princess Hang Li Po, a Chinese noblewoman, in marriage to the Sultan of Malaka, because Malaka was a very important linchpin when it came to trade and diplomacy. Okay, so yeah, because if you had your hands on Malaka, you basically controlled the trade routes of silk and of spices and of diamonds and gold, whatever. Now today is a Monday, so it's not awfully crowded, but it's best that you come on a weekday, because it gets very crowded on weekends, and you won't even find a place to park. So if you can, try to come on a weekday. Malaka is one of these places where you can escape the hustle and bustle of Kuala Lumpur. Look, old Baba Nyonya houses, old Peranakan houses, and simply soak in the culture of what Malaya used to be before it was hijacked by cosmopolitanism and Philistinism dressed up as culture. Yes. And if you're lucky, you might even see a couple of ladies dressed in kabayas. Yes, do you see those ladies? Those are the Nyonya kabayas. Now, as you see, the kabaya in this advertisement wraps around the ladies very tightly. Now, if any old generation Nyonya were to see a kabaya like this, they would consider it very menjolok mata, very shocking, because it's so tight. what you're getting is really the Amoy aesthetic that's been basically transplanted onto the Nyonya Kebaya. And so what I see is the commodification of my culture without really any understanding of it. Because the kebaya is not supposed to fit tightly like a modern dress. It's supposed to drape over your body. Here, I'll show you an example of my grandmother's kebaya. Look at this picture. See, the sleeves don't hug the arms. The sleeves drape. The fit does not hug the figure like a bodysuit. Okay, so what's happening is basically the kebaya is being utilized as an advertisement symbol, yeah, in a language that my grandmother wouldn't even have read, no doubt. But it's so ironic. Everyone seems to love Nyonya things, but not actual Nyonya people. You see, I mean, the very same people who called my grandmother a banana and a running dog because she didn't speak Mandarin and she taught English, and she passed down this clipped accent to me. Well, those very same people would probably fetishize her kebaya and love eating Nyonya food. Isn't that ironic? A couple of weeks ago, there was this fellow on Threads who said the Malaysian Chinese population is declining rapidly. Oh, there's a crow next to me. Hello, Mr. Crow. Yes, the Malaysian Chinese population is declining rapidly. Should we be selfish and let Malaysia lose this identity naturally and let other countries benefit from our culture? Now, this isn't the first time that we've heard such a veiled threat by malcontents whose ancestors were given jus soli by the Malays and the Peranakans, like Tan Cheng Lock, who vouched for them. And although I do not endorse race-based affirmative action, first of all, I have to say this, and yes, eventually we will have to arrive at a Malaysia where affirmative action is needs-based, although race-based affirmative action is not simply a racist policy that was designed to punish the minorities. While yes, it does get hijacked by wealthy elites of the Malay community, the purpose of this misapplied policy was nevertheless noble. But in any case, overall, people like this individual in question have been allowed to thrive, to flourish, to build their own schools, to speak whatever language they want in this country, to even create jobs with Chinese speakers required, to bully and belittle Peranakans like myself and call us bananas. They've been allowed the freedom to do all that, and yet they still behave as if they are marginalized like Mexicans are in America, or like Aboriginal Australians are in Australia. They still act as if they are marginalized victims. Now, imperfect policy that has indeed harmed poor members of the Chinese and Indian and other minority communities, yes, that can be addressed, that should be addressed, and that must be addressed. But when people talk as if, you know, they are the center of this country and that this country will collapse without them, and when I say people, you know which people I'm talking about, this is a very arrogant take, frankly, which presupposes that before the Chinese diaspora came around, the Malays and the Peranakans didn't already have a bustling and organic civilization of our own. Do you think that the Emperor of China would have wanted to form links with Malaka if Malaka was a shithole? Do you think the British would come to Malaya to make money if Malaya was a shithole? No. So this solipsistic take is a very arrogant one that assumes that without the Chinese diaspora, Nusantara would be nothing. And it's the same kind of mentality that we see, you know, in many in the diaspora, especially in Singapore, who genuinely believe that without Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore would be nothing. As if before Lee Kuan Yew's Hakka ancestors came about, a generation or two ago, before he was born, well, Singapore was just a shithole, they say, right? If I had to choose to vote between Tunku Abdul Rahman and Lee Kuan Yew, I would vote for Tunku, our first Prime Minister, in a heartbeat. Yes, I know this is blasphemy for the Malaysian Chinese community because they say, wow, so you don't like meritocracy, you don't like performance, you don't like, skyscrapers, beautiful shopping malls and nice restaurants. Well, I like these things, but I don't think they're crucial for a civilization. They're just the topping of a civilization, but they don't form the base. Because the base of civilization, for me, I like to use the acronym ABS, ABS, for the base of civilization from my Nusantaran worldview. The first, A, Adat, which means custom. Now, custom means how you do things. For example, it can be as simple as taking off your shoes when you enter a mosque or when you enter a house. Or it can also mean making sure that no guest leaves your house hungry, that every guest is fed, and you insist that the guest eats and drinks. That's Adat, okay? B in ABS stands for Budi, or benevolence. Now let me give you an example of Budi. There was once a time when Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, came home to get something. He'd forgotten something, and his servants were actually watching his TV in secret because they were curious what was on the program. And there's a video whose link I'll put in the description, and rather than punishing them, rather than scolding them, he quietly fixed the problem by buying them a TV of their own. Now, from the hardcore meritocratic, technocratic point of view, from the Lee Kuan Yew point of view, you could say this was a weak man. But from our Nusantara perspective, this was not weakness. This was benevolence, Budi. So definitely, Lee Kuan Yew would have given the servants a dressing down or perhaps sacked them. But Tunku solved the problem by giving them a TV of their own. That is what we mean by Budi. So if people ask me why I would rather live in Malaysia, or rather why I should prefer to have been born in Malaysia rather than Singapore, with no offense towards the Singaporeans, even though Singapore is much more stable politically and much more meritocratic in a technocratic sense, and of course much richer than Malaysia, I will say that I would rather live in an imperfect society that was developed by a kind man than a perfect utopia that was developed by a cold man. And S, Sopan. Sopan means manners. It means, it's like, for example, you never go to someone's house empty-handed. Or yesterday, for example, I got a chap who was running a shop, really, to watch over my phone for a while. I asked him if he would like some kueh, and he said no thank you, but I still bought him some kueh anyway, because that is Sopan. When someone does something nice for you, you do something nice for them in return. But to be a truly Sopan, or well-mannered person, you should be polite to people regardless of whether they can do anything for you or not. You know, like, that you see a lot of people in Malaysia, for example, saying that if you want respect, learn my language. And there was a guy named Corgan, I think, who said to me, if you don't want to spend time learning another language, which means Chinese, because I don't think he speaks Tamil, expect to be hated by the Chinese community. That is not Sopan. To say that I will only respect you if you learn my language or if you bend to my ways, that is not Sopan. Do you know who was a man who embodied the three characteristics of Adat, Budaya and Sopan? Yes, Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia. Because while Lee Kuan Yew was brilliant, no doubt, he often fell short on all three categories. at least from a Nusantaran standpoint. Because Lee Kuan Yew was cold, efficient, and dare I say, calculating and shrewd, but he wasn't a warm man. He wasn't a gentle, kind man. And from the Nusantaran perspective, not from your Asian or East Asian diaspora perspective, from the Nusantaran perspective, it is better that a leader be gentle than efficient. It is better that a leader is imperfect but kind, rather than outstanding but unkind. Tunku Abdul Rahman once said that I want a happy Malaysia, not a powerful one. I want a country of houses rather than barracks, of food rather than bullets, and clothing rather than uniforms. And then you juxtapose that with Lee Kuan Yew's hard-nosed pragmatism of, oh, we must become a poisoned shrimp to survive. We have nothing but our hard work. I must keep you competitive. I must keep you fighting. Do you see why I would vote for Tunku Abdul Rahman in a heartbeat over Lee Kuan Yew? And many diaspora Chinese do not understand that because they don't understand the Nusantara perspective. They think that I'm being sentimental, I'm being weak, I don't want to compete, I don't want to fight in a meritocratic rat race, and frankly I don't. I want to live with the kampung spirit, the village spirit. I want a society where everyone takes care of each other, where no one is left behind. I don't want a society full of skyscrapers and magnificent shopping malls where the poor are just treated like a nuisance and the downtrodden are treated like an inconvenience. No. But like I said, whenever I was mixing around in Chinese diaspora circles in the urban areas like PJ and Kuala Lumpur, I always felt like screaming on the inside because there were so many things that I wanted to say that would be politically incorrect if I said them out loud. But now that I'm 35 years old and I am financially stable enough not to not worry about pissing anyone off, I could say it. You know, a lot of people in the Chinese diaspora think that Singapore had to separate from Malaysia because Lee Kuan Yew wanted equality, right? And that Tunku Abdul Rahman was threatened by Lee Kuan Yew's brilliance, apparently. The truth is, though, that if I were Tunku Abdul Rahman, I too would have kicked Lee Kuan Yew out of Malaysia, simply because the race riots, the violence would have been astronomical. We would have seen May 13 times 10 if Lee Kuan Yew had been allowed to stay and push his Malaysia narrative, because the Malays and even the Babanyonias silently understood what Lee meant by the Malaysia dream wasn't a country where we sit together in the kampung and sing kumbaya. No, Lee Kuan Yew's vision for Malaysia was basically a cold, sterile technocracy where everyone competes against each other and everyone basically scrambles for resources. And that is why basically everyone wants to say this but is too afraid to say this. The kampung spirit in Singapore is gone, replaced by GDP, report cards and KPI performance. But it's not there. And Malaysia is not a perfect country, but it still has the kampung spirit, because Malaysia has not been created in the image of Lee Kuan Yew. In Singapore, yes, you see beautiful shopping malls, you see wonderful restaurants and lovely places to visit, such as air-conditioned cafes and very, very comfortable malls, but you don't see the dark side that built Singapore, such as the exploitation of Filipina and Bangladeshi foreign workers. Now, Malaysia is not innocent of that either, okay? You don't see the dark side, like children who are feeling borderline suicidal, you know, because of academic pressure by their parents, and you don't see other dark aspects of Singaporean society, like old folks working in kopitiams and hawker centers who are too afraid to lose their old age benefits, because if they retire, at least under Lee Kuan Yew's time, if you retired, you would lose your benefits. But more importantly, my Baba and Nyonya identity is frankly safer under a leader like Tunku Abdul Rahman rather than a leader like Lee Kuan Yew, because he wanted to bring everyone under a stratified school system, basically. The fact of the matter is that Peranakans in Singapore have now become, as a result of Lee Kuan Yew's policies and ruling, more cynicized. And right now, the Peranakan identity in Singapore, or the Baba Nyonya identity in Singapore, has become Chinese people who speak Malay and cook curry. Rather than a Creole hybrid people of Nusantara, they have suddenly become a Chinese-looking people, or Chinese people who wear kebayas and cook curry and speak Malay. So essentially, the base of the culture has shifted from the Malay world to the Sinosphere. And this is of course done in order to basically make the culture and the identity more marketable and palatable to not only the Chinese diaspora, but also to the Angmos, the expats, the numerous Western expats who come to Singapore and think, well, okay, Peranakan culture is quaint and quirky Chinese culture with Malay characteristics, but it's not actually a Creole and hybrid and messy culture that might not be understood by people who did not grow up in that ecosystem. Okay, so the thing is, many Singaporean Peranakans do not even speak Malay anymore, and Malay is the base language of the Baba Nyonyas. Chinese, whether that be Hokkien or Teochew, that is the sprinkling, but the base language is Malay. And unfortunately, many Singaporean Peranakans have stopped even identifying as Peranakans. Now they just identify as Chinese, basically. Forgotten how to speak Malay. They now they have swapped basically from Malay to Mandarin. Now I'm not actually blaming them for doing what they do to survive in that ecosystem, but Peranakans, ironically, in the most Muslim majority places in Malaysia, like Kelantan and Terengganu, are the ones that hold on most tightly to the Peranakan identity. Not cling on to it, I mean, they're the ones who actually maintain the flame of the culture, while those in cosmopolitan places like Singapore have fundamentally become, dare I say, Sinkified? I don't want to put it that way, but yeah, unfortunately, you know, you could say it started with Lim Boon Keng, the Peranakan revivalist who lived before Lee Kuan Yew was even sucking his thumb. It started with Lim Boon Keng, who thought that the Peranakans had were basically a historical mistake, and that they needed to be corrected and shifted back to the Chinese sphere. But I'll talk about Lim Boon Keng in another video. More importantly, however, I want to say that not everybody shares this cosmopolitan liberal idea of Singapore being the utopia that we want in Malaysia. Some of us want progress, but without sacrificing the collectivism and the kampung spirit. We want progress. We want a civilized standard of living for people, but we don't want to sacrifice the kampung spirit, you see. But yeah. But I just want to say to the diaspora supremacists like Mr. Aaron Wong, you know, you always threaten to leave. Year after year you threaten to leave, and Singapore is right next door, but you don't even leave for Singapore, do you? Could it be because you're living a very comfortable life in Malaysia and you frankly don't want to give up your privileges over here? The thing is though, if all Malaysian Chinese hypothetically were to leave this country and only the Malays and the Peranakans and the Indians were to remain, aside from other minority groups, well, I'd be sad because my friends would also be leaving. I would be sad. But you know, I'd be sad for a while, then I'd adapt. I'd miss Siuyok, but you know, my life would go on as normal. It's not like you, Mr. Wong, leaving. It's really that much of a big deal for me. Not telling you to leave, by the way. I'm just saying that if you're so unhappy here, you can actually go. You know, I just don't slam the door on your way out. But the thing is, my life doesn't really change much either way, even without Chinese spaces. I don't speak Chinese anyway. So yeah, the point is, it doesn't really matter. When you make a threat like that, should we leave and you know, because we carry an indispensable part of culture with us, part of Malaysian culture, I say, if you would like to, then please go. I don't want to hold you prisoner here, and if you feel you'd be happier in Singapore, why, please go ahead and be my guest and leave. So I'd like to end this video by saying that thank you for watching if you've made it this far, and I want to say that we don't have to pick between Western liberal democracy and Chinese Mandarin technocracy. We do not. We have our own civilization, our own Nusantaran rhythm, and our own way of doing things. The kampung spirit will continue to live in all of us. We don't have to pick between Western liberal democracy and Mandarin technocracy. We can have a third way, the Nusantara way, the way of our ancestors, the way that has been practiced for hundreds of years. But I just want to end this video by saying that no, we did not need Raffles, and we certainly did not need Harry Lee in order to civilize us. Because we of Nusantara, well, had always been civilized before Lee Kuan Yew was even in diapers. So yes, we did not need, I repeat, we did not need Western liberalism or Chinese Mandarin technocracy in order to make us civilized. We were always civilized, and if you cannot see that, then it shows your own ethnocentrism. And for my Marxist friends, you know, who say that, you know, Marxism is the only way forward, I agree with you that socialism is the only way forward, but our socialism may not necessarily coincide with your socialism. My take is this: does your socialism respect Adat, Budi and Sopan? If it does, then we embrace it. If it does not respect our Nusantaran, Adat, Budi and Sopan, we discard it. Thank you very much, and I'm going off to lunch now. Have a wonderful day.